Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 543. This program is in loving memory of Miriam Bas Eliyahu Altes Salah Shalom and in merit of Baruch Binyamin ben Menucha Lana Altes, Yukusil ben Leah Rachel and Rachel Bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Taders ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rachel Altes. So we are right in the middle of the month of Iyar, the month that follows Chedesh HaGeula, the month of redemption, Nisan, when we celebrated the Geulas Mitzrayim, and the month that prepares us for the third month, which is the month of Sivan, the month of Matan Torah. And we relive it, B'chol Yom Yiyeh Beinecha Chadoshim. It's not just events that happened in the past, but recreated the energy of that time back then is happening right now, and with even more intensity as every year passes. So we have many lessons from this period in time, a very powerful period. It's a month that we count the Omer the whole entire month, that began the second day of Pesach, as I said, leading us into Shavuos, into Matan Torah, time of special personal refinement, and many other personal messages that are relevant to our emotional, psychological, and spiritual lives. And hence, MyLife Chassidus Applied, applying Chassidus to the challenges and the struggles, the positives, the negatives, all the experiences we go through in life, to understand its deeper meaning, to help us live up to and fulfill our calling and purpose for which God sent us to this world. Being that today is Yud Gimel Iyar, which is a special day, it's the 73rd yahrzeit of the Rebbe's youngest brother, Reb Yisroel Aryeh Leib. So we will talk about that. We'll begin with that. We'll also discuss next day, Yud Iyar, of course, is Pesach Sheni, and then later this week is Lag B'omer, and in general, sefira. So these will be part of the themes we discuss, plus some timely events, some follow-up, as always, fed and generated by your questions and your comments, which keep coming in. Thank God. I feel very honored and feel very blessed that having that's the greatest affirmation of all. When people continue to ask questions, continue to make comments, continue to challenge, which is all part of the process of hafachba, the kulaba. We keep turning and finding in Torah and Chassidus more and more depth and relevance in our personal lives. So, with that said, ChassidusApplied.com is our website where you can submit with full confidentiality and anonymity any question. Nothing is off limits, nothing is taboo. Any question can be asked there, and Mitzvah Hashem, I will get to it. Some questions I can address immediately, some take a little time, simply because there's so many different questions. And you can also find other resources there at ChassidusApplied.com. I've also been mentioning recently, being that we have a new tool that many people are using, which is Simon Jacobson.ai, where you can literally have a virtual conversation with me, whether it's a conversation in voice or by chat. And it essentially has all the material and inventory of everything I've ever said or taught, including these programs, MyLife Chassidus Applied. Try it out, and please let me know how it works, how well it's going. It's just another additional way of using technology that is all created ultimately by the powers of Hashem. The Rebbe calls it a koyach adir, an awesome power in nature that we can use to spread yafutza meinesecha chutza, to spread the well springs to the farthest chutza she'en chutza memenu, in ways that were unprecedented, not possible in the past. So we must utilize that for exactly that purpose until we fill the world with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. Molo Adas Deus Hashem, K'mayim le'yam chasam, which we can call ultimately our mission, our goal, our ultimate goal. So with that, let us begin with Pesach Sheni. Let us begin with Yud Gimel Iyar, which is today. So as I said, it's the 73rd yahrzeit of the Rebbe's brother, Tavshin Yud Beis Yud Gimel Iyar. And the Rebbe's brother was a mysterious figure. We know a little about him, not much. There are some rishimis And of course, there's what the Rebbe himself has said over the years. Interestingly, by Fabrengen, there was a Professor Rosenblum, a mathematician who the Rebbe had asked a personal favor, and he comes over to the Rebbe by Fabrengen, and the Rebbe said to him, I hope you will fulfill my request. It's a personal request for you to look over the documents I gave you. He had given him papers that he wanted published, mathematical formulas. And the Rebbe didn't say who it's from. But then, while he's talking to Rabbi, Professor Rosenblum between Sichos by Fabrengen, you could hear the Rebbe finally does say, it's my brother's. We have very little from him. This is one of the only things we have from him. My brother had a zealous independence. He was zealous about his independence. It's an interesting way the Rebbe described his brother. Independence meaning being his own man, doing it his way. And Professor Rosenblum did make that effort, and he ultimately prepared. They gave it out in a booklet. And it's just mathematics that he had worked on, I think, when his time in Liverpool, in England. But regardless, he died quite young. And the Rebbe, of course, his brother, sat shiva for his own brother. The Rebbe's second brother, Berel, Dave Ber, was unfortunately tragically killed, Hashem Yinkum Dome, by the Nazis, Yimach Shemam. So it's a day that the Rebbe honored, and especially in the later years, we have actually talks the Rebbe delivered about his brother and his name, Yisroel Aryeh Leib. So there are quite a few lessons that the Rebbe addressed, and essentially also covered somewhat of his, you can say, twists and turns of his life. The Yisroel Aryeh Leib, the Rebbe emphasizes, is all about transforming the negative into a positive. He himself had gone through his own challenges, his ups and downs. So Yisroel is from the name, of course, that Malach of Esav gave to Yaakov, because he was fighting the angel of Esav, and because he prevailed, that's the name Yisroel. So the name Yisroel reflects on how Yidden have the ability to prevail over anything. And Aryeh Leib, which is basically Yiddish and the Hebrew for the word lion, is also transforming. A lion itself is a chaya tamea, is not a pure animal. But we also know, we know the different expressions about Aryeh, milei shog k'aryeh shog. The cry of a lion, the roar of a lion reflects in many ways the roar of the divine. In the famous Medrash, where it talks about imla yishe karyeh is the exact expression, where it talks about the month of Av is the month of Aryeh, of Leo, lion, that on one hand is the negative lion, that in the month of the lion was destroyed, the lion, which is the Beis Hamikdash, was destroyed by the lion Nebuchadnezzar, Almanas, in order to transform that in the month of lion, the Aryeh, the lion, will be rebuilt by the Aryeh, which refers to the Eibishter. So it's also about transformation. And indeed, there's a very powerful reshima, which I've mentioned in previous years, being that this is the 12th year that we're doing MyLife Chassidus Applied. So we've spoken about Yud Gimel Iyar in previous years, which again you can find easily through a search on chassidusapplied.com. So there's a reshima from the Rebbe where he talks about Yud Gimel Iyar. It's printed in Likutei Sichos, volume 27, page 363 and 364. A shorter version of it we had earlier, printed in Likutei Sichos, volume 3, page 976, in the footnote 19. But briefly, the Rebbe speaks literally about a person going through Yeridus and Aliyas, and all of life ultimately is everything. Even when a person may have setbacks or may have a downturn, it's all leading toward Aliyas. It's a very fascinating Shema, which I learned inside. I'm not going to do it now because we have it already in previous programs, but you can check it out in those pages. But as well, if you look up Yud Gimel Iyar in previous years of MyLife Chassidus Applied, I discussed it more at length. But all of it leads to one key point, and very much fitting, of course, to the theme of month of Iyar. Iyar has also this paradoxical element. On one hand, we don't do simchas, as we're going to discuss soon, weddings, music, listen to music, and other leisurely things, because there was the Magefa, the epidemic that killed 24,000 of Rabbi Akiva's students, because Leinogu covered Zebizah. They didn't honor each other. And at the same time, the month of Iyar is filled with the sefira ha'emet, where we refine ourselves and refine our personalities and characters in order to prepare us for Matan Torah. So the theme of Iyar has itself those dual messages and dual elements. Within Iyar, we have coming up, we have Lag B'omer, which is a unique day, a day of simcha, as again we'll discuss soon. So the theme ultimately is that even in the darkest of dark, and even when there seem to be setbacks and downturns and twists and turns in life, everything is leading toward the positive. It's all ultimately leading toward a conclusion where we'll see the beauty and the goodness in everything. Sometimes you see it immediately, sometimes it takes time. And that indeed is also a theme, part of the theme of this week's chapter, which we'll also discuss. And the Rebbe actually makes reference to in one of the notes in the Rishima that I mentioned, the Yud Gimel Iyar Rishima. It's actually not a Yud Gimel Iyar Rishima. It's a Rishima when the Rebbe stood up from Shiva, which was in Chof Iyar, 7 days later. So then the Rebbe spoke, and it says there, the Rebbe spoke, and then he edited it, and that's what we have there, printed in the Kutei Sichos that I mentioned, where the Rebbe speaks about this. And he talks an example actually from this week's parsha, which we'll discuss again, how something that seems like a handicap or a negative can be turned into understanding it as a propelling us to a far greater and more powerful place, a positive place. So it's a lesson to us, all of us in life, and in many ways it also leads us into the lesson of Pesach Sheni, which comes right after Yud Gimel, Yudalad Iyar. Yudalad Iyar, Pesach Sheni. What's Pesach Sheni? As the Frierdiker Rebbe says, brought na yem yem. The lesson is nishtakim for a foul. Nothing is ever lost, even when it seems that it may be. Here the Yidden came and said, we were unable to bring the Pesach Rishon when they left Mitzrayim, either because they were b'derech lecheka, or derech lecheka obviously doesn't apply there, but in the future years, what happens if a person is not close to Beis Hamikdash on Pesach, and he can't bring the korban Pesach, or he's tamei, he's impure? So Lama Negara, they cried out to Moshe Rabbeinu, why should we be deprived? And Moshe indeed hears from Hashem, give them Pesach Sheni. Says the Frierdiker Rebbe, the lesson, that's a lesson stuck in farfal, that even if you missed out, and even if you're distant, which means not just physical distance or but spiritual distance, or Tameya, you're not in the purest state, and you're unable to bring the Pesach Rishon, you have the second chance. So stuck in farfal, nothing is lost. Literally this message. Now how's that possible? You can say, 1 second, damage was done. No, God forbid if someone's in an accident and some damage is done, sometimes it can't be repaired completely. But we're talking about Hashem here, that everything in this world and everything in existence is ultimately has the divine within it. So even if it's concealed, and even yes, indeed, some things have been severed, that's only on the outer levels. Think of polluted or clogged or blocked arteries. But the heart and the neshama, most importantly, libi ani yeshena, a person may be asleep, and sleep can be also spiritual sleep. But libi er, but my heart is awake. Could be shcheirani. I'm dark, I'm concealed. The divine is concealed, and life is difficult, and I have challenges. But v'nova, but I'm beautiful, and indeed a great beauty that comes dafka from the darkness, as Chassidus explains at length. So the lesson is, that's not just when things appear good and are good on the surface, but everything in life has tremendous potent goodness in it, because everything has godliness in it, and godliness is good. Teva, Eibishter is etzema tev and teva tev lehetiv. However, that goodness can be concealed, sometimes concealed in ways that not in our control, sometimes concealed due to our behavior. But everything can be redeemed, and there's nothing that cannot be redeemed, one way or another. It's a tremendous lesson in life, even though we may have heard it many times. But a person who really holds on to that really is what gives us the strength to overcome any challenge. To know that the story is not over. Because the last and the worst possible thing is when you think, too late for me. It's too late. The risk is farfal. I lost out the opportunity. Because then you don't have the strength and the confidence and the conviction to forge ahead. To knowing that it's not too late. That there is nishtakim farfal, nothing is lost. And even things that may appear complete darkness, there's nothing that's complete darkness. Today we know even a black hole in science, and you see no light. We know the light is so intense. The gravitational pull doesn't allow even the light to escape, but there's tremendous light there. And the same thing psychologically and emotionally. The very fact that something is dark, it requires energy. The energy is inverted energy. The tzimtzum takes more power to make tzimtzum than to reveal. Think of a wise person who has something to say. It's much harder to exercise restraint than to express yourself. That's why we say, Mila besela shtika betrei. When you say a word, it's besela. You get a coin. But shtika earns 2 coins. Because holding back, restraining is harder. Same thing when the divine energy, like light that shines, obviously is very powerful. But light that doesn't shine and is contained within and restrained and suppressed takes even more power. So you have to reveal it. And that's why indeed you find when people are in challenge and they're pressured, it'll bring out deeper resources. More when things are just much more powerful than when there's no resistance. Like you see, resistance always brings out deeper elements. You press an olive, until you don't press an olive, you don't really get its oil. And the more pressure, the more you can access and unleash the potency within. And thus, the challenges of life carry even more power than when things are going smoothly and well. We still pray that it should all be beautiful, and there shouldn't be such challenges, only positive ones. But even when there is a setback, we realize this is a very powerful lesson in healing, in growth, in hope, in betochen. And I always share it also with people who may not even be familiar with the Torah perspectives, how critical this is in all forms of healing, all therapy. It's all based on the belief, the absolute conviction that you have what it takes to get through any given situation. And God would never give a challenge to someone that they cannot deal with. We would never get a challenge if we didn't have the ability to deal with the challenge. Magdim refuah lamaka, we always have the resources to heal even before the challenge was presented to us. So then let's move from Pesach Sheni to, so the answer, how do we personalize this day, Pesach Sheni? We take this lesson and look at our own lives and see where there is indeed a lesson where you may think something is farfallen, something may be been lost, a lost opportunity, a lost situation, and you come to discover, no, it's not the case. It may not be exactly the script that you like. Some people say, well, I wanted this opportunity. Maybe that lost opportunity brings you to a much greater opportunity. You have to keep your mind open. And there are many, many sub-lessons from this general theme and general idea. Okay. So then let us now move to Lag B'omer later in the week. We have Lag B'omer. Why do we celebrate on this day when Rashbi passed away? Or as one person wrote it, if someone tried to make a big party with music and parades on Gimel Tammuz, they would be considered very disrespectful. So why is it an accepted community practice to make big parties on Lag B'omer when the Rashbi, a very, very holy man, was nifter? The answer is because the Rashbi himself asked for it. In Pesach Sheni he brings the expression Yom Simchoseh Shel Rashbi, because Rashbi, as the Zohar tells us, says to his students, and for generations to come, he says, I'm making a personal request that on my day, obviously they sat shiva for him then, but every year on Lag B'omer, the day of my stalkus, my elula, should be a simcha. Why? Because this is the day when I completely connect with Hashem. B'chat katiris katana, with one bond, I bond with Him. So Rashbi made a specific request to the point that one of the Talmidei Arizal, who used to say Nachem every day, Nachem is, you say, to comfort us for the Beis HaMikdash, and he said it on Lag B'omer, and Rashbi was upset. And he needed a tikkun for it. Because this is a day Rashbi himself. So the question, of course, is why Rashbi? What about Moshe Rabbeinu? Zayin Oder? All the other tzaddikim? For all of them got bound to Hashem. Chad Katiris Katan on the day of their Histalkus Hilula. So one of the reasons is because Rashbi was morid the Nigla Teira and morid the Primis HaTeira. Rashbi was a tremendous Tana, scholar, a sage of the Talmud, to the extent that Rabbi Akiva, his teacher, referred to him that he took the best of the teachings, Termosi. And at the same time, he was also, of course, the author of the Zohar, Primis HaTeira. So he brought together both parts of Teira, the Neshama, Neshmasa Daraisa, and Galia Daraisa, the body and the soul and body of Teira. Simcha ultimately comes from, like we say about Yayin. Nichnis Yayin Yotza Seid. Yayin brings Simcha. Simcha comes when you reveal the different dimensions. When a person is besimcha, they're revealing their inner self. There's the regular routine life. When you're Simcha, you express yourself. Yayin and Sotah is the same gematria, 70. Because that's what Yayin does. Yayin is Yismach Leiv Anoshim. It causes a person to have Simcha. Just like that, we spoke before about the olive, the same thing with the grape. Roza Daraisa, the secrets of Teira are compared to wine, because wine is hidden inside the grape. Like Primis HaTeira, that's hidden within. But when you bring it out, it brings a tremendous Simcha. And in general, joy and celebration is by looking deeper into any given story. Because if on the surface it may not look so positive, like we discussed before, comes Primis and says, look deeper into the narrative and you'll see the beauty in it. Like the Gemara tells us about Rashbi Take. He sent his son Rabbi Lazar to receive blessings from the sages in the West. He came back mortified. He said, they didn't bless me, they cursed me. And Rashbi said, what did they say to you? And he started repeating what they said. And Rashbi looked at him and said, what they said to you were really brachas. And there's many different explanations why they said it in that language, but the bottom line is Rashbi was able to see the bracha within what others may think is a klola, is a curse. When the Tata length, Hetzchanar brachas, as the Mittler Rebbe said about the Teichacha. When his father would read the Torah, you hear the brachas. The Primis HaTeiv, the deeper chesed, the chesed chsadim nistarim, the chsadim nalamim. The love that is sometimes hidden is the deepest type. So Primis in general is a revealer, and that's what Simcha is. So Rashbi emphasized on this day, yes, on one end there was a histalkos on one side, which has a certain sadness, but overall, ultimately, it carries a tremendous power. And look what happens, like B'omer, year after year, the Simcha, people are traveling to Miran, the Arizal would go to Miran, it says he would spend 3 days there. You could imagine, the Shtadchus al-Kivrei Tzadikim and what kind of revelations. And Lag B'omer, the Rashbi revealed the deepest secrets, as it says in Idra Zutah, which is a section of Zohar, where it talks about Parshas Hazinu, where it talks about the Rashbi's Histalkus Hilula. He says, I will reveal the deeper secrets today. Dafka in that day, when the neshama was separated from the body. Just as an aside, why is it called Idra Zutah? Idra is like a group or a community or a gathering. So Zutah is a small gathering because then the 7 Talmidim of the Rashbi gathered. There's Idra Rabba and Pasha Nase in Zohar. The Rabba, the great, there's 10 students, but by the time the Rashbi, Hilula, Stalkus, 3 of the Talmidim were no longer there with them. So it's called Idra Rabba, Idra Zutah. And there's Taka, the deepest secrets. And every year, Lag B'omer, that was the story of Lag B'omer. And by the Rabbeim we find, Mittler Rebbe would go out in the field and would show miracles, as it says in Ayem Yem, especially around children. The Rashbi was Pekah Dakotis. He helped barren women who were unable to have children. Same idea. What's blocking them from having a child? Something's blocking. You need to be Megal the Pnimius. Both Begashmis and Beruchnis. And that's why the Rabbeim, Mittler Rebbe, did miracles around the birth of children. Same way the Rebbe, people especially who had difficulty with fertility, would come to the Rebbe on Lag B'omer. All the time, but especially Lag B'omer. So Lag B'omer is the Gili of Pnimius. Eid Hagal Hazeh, Lag B'omer, the Mittler Rebbe explains in the Siddur, Imdach, based on the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim. Eid Hagal Hazeh, when Lavan and Yaakov made a gal was like a mound. That would be like a boundary. So gal, Lag B'omer, Lag is Eisi's gal. The gal is a boundary between Nigla and Pnimius. But on Lag B'omer, Machatzti v'ani erpa, Machatzti means, yes, I struck him with an illness, v'ani erpa, and I will also heal him. Same idea of getting over a difficulty by digging deeper and finding healing even in dark situations. which is essentially what Rashbi did. As we also know, after the 12 years that the Rashbi and Rabbi Lazar had to hide from the Romans, they came out, they were so refined that Rashbi, it says, the Gemara says, whatever he looked at began to burn, because he looked at the world that was involved in their pettiness and superficial items. It literally started to burn, either literally or figuratively. Hashem said, no, I didn't create a world to be destroyed. Go back one more year, 13th year, Bar Mitzvah year, to achieve a deeper level of spiritual maturity. And then Rashbi came out a year later, and what happened? Wherever he saw a problem, he fixed it. That's the ultimate goal. By digging deeper, because that's how you heal something. You go deeper into it. You go to a place that is greater than the problem, and that's how you transform it. You can't solve a problem from the same system where the problem was created, so you have to go beyond the system. That's previous. So all that adds up to a day of tremendous simcha. The second point of Lag B'omer, says the Rebbe, in many of his sikhs, especially when he would speak at the Lag B'omer parades to the children, was the idea of that was the day that the epidemic, the Magefa, stopped. The 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva who were not showing respect to one another stopped. So it's also a simcha for that reason. So in that context, Lag B'omer teaches us many lessons of simcha, and of course the need to find respect, because ultimately respect and Avos Yisrael, v'ahavta lecha kamecha, zeh klal gadol b'Torah, which was what Rabbi Akiva taught. That loving another, that's the foundation, that's the klal gadol, that's the big principle, great principle of Torah. That's also through Gili HaPnimius, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya Perek Lev, Lamed Beis, which is also Lev, heart, and also pronounced love. That the secret to Ava, he says, is when nafshe ike v'gufei tofel, when the nefesh, the pnimius, is the primary thing in your life. So you're not looking at the outside of somebody, where there you may not like what you see, or you may not find something in common, but you realize that we're all one. Av echad l'kalanu v'kulam masimas miyadei gudulosna malos, and all the expressions he uses there in Tanya, because Mitzad the Neshama, we're like one organism, as the Yerushalmi says. So it's all about revealing the Pnimius. So of course, the lesson from Lag B'omer is, number one, to always look for the inner dimension in every person, including ourselves. And knowing that even when there's a setback or a challenge, when you dig deeper, you find the deeper goodness. Avos Yisrael, showing love to every person, which obviously is the antithesis to not being respectful to anyone. Avos and Achdus Yisrael, and all that leads to serving Hashem with great simcha. Through the joining of the chitzeni, of the nigla and the pnimius, of the guf and the neshama. That real healthy life is when you are both have a healthy body and a healthy soul, and they both complement each other. Feeding the neshama just as much as we feed the body, and understanding that the body is a vehicle for the neshama's journey in this world. With that, let us go to talk about, you can either go to Sefira Se'emer, which is, I think that's what we'll do, and then we'll go to Parshas Emer, and then we'll talk about some timely matters. Okay. So Lag B'omer, of course, is the 33rd day of the Emer, and it's part of the whole journey of Emer. It's also, as we know, Hoid Shebahoid. That's Lag B'omer, Hoid Shebahoid, which is beauty within beauty, and makes sense. And Hoid is also from the word Heidah, Heidah Shebaheidah, acknowledgement, bittul. Bittul is the essence of when a person goes into the neshama primis dika level, that's bittul. The guf is a yesh. That's what the Alter Rebbe says there in chapter 32 in Tanya. That the guf is a yesh, and a yesh, my ego, is going to be a contradiction to your ego. Bittul is the antidote to self-interest and to the divisiveness that egos create, that bodies create, that the physical world, materialism creates. So Hoid Shebahoid. So let's talk about the general oimers. So starting from the beginning, someone asked, what is the significance of counting the omer? So I have a whole bunch of questions on sefira seimer, and that's what we'll discuss now. So, of course, it starts our pasuk in Parshas Emor, in this week's parsha, actually, where v'sfartem lachem mochlis haShabbos, which Chazal explained means b'mochlis haPesach, the second day of Pesach. You shall count shiva shavuos, 7 weeks, which consists of 49 days, and b'yem hachamishim, in the 50th day, that will become the day what's called Chag HaShavuos. Now, why did they count? So the Ran, the end of Pesach Pesachim, says they counted out of gaguyim, yearning, when they heard that leaving Mitzrayim is leading them to serve God by Har Sinai. The excitement. What do you do when you're excited about something? You start counting down. So they started counting. So the counting represents a tremendous passion, the tremendous yearning to the day when Matan Torah will come. On a technical level, the counting was also about knowing when to bring the korban that is brought on Shavuos. So it's a Iyar. Iyar was a measure of barley that was part of the process of the offerings brought into the Beis HaMikdash. But what's the deeper meaning behind the counting of the Omer? So Chassidus explains that Omer, there's Michael Behema. Se'irim, it's oats. Chitim is Michael Adam, people eat grain. You could eat oats too, but oats is specifically for animals. So it's referring to the bitter of the Nefesh HaBamis. That in these 49 days, the counting wasn't just counting numbers, it was also a process of refinement. And that's why we say every day, when we count the Omer, we say Chesed Shebechesed, Gvura Shebegvura, Gvura Shebechesed, Tefera Shebechesed. Week 1 is Chesed. It's focusing on the 49, 7 times 7, the 7 emotions from Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, Malchus. Each one encompassing 7 times 7. And each day is a focus on that sefira, as we say in the Iyar, the refinement and elevation and purification of that particular attribute within us. Some of you may be familiar with a book I did called The Spiritual Guide to Counting the Omer, which actually breaks it down into simple English with a meditation and exercise for each of the days. There's many applications, obviously, but I do one of them in that book. It's also an app. You can check it out. It's called My Omer, a free app that you can download that has, essentially it's the book a little condensed. And that's what the Veda is. That makes total sense. That's why it's a way to prepare, as we left Mitzrayim, for Matan Torah. You want to prepare for such a momentous and monumental occasion by refining yourself, to make yourself a keli. So we climb 49 days. The 50th day we don't count. That's what comes as a result of the 49 days of refinement. Birur HaMidas, and specifically the refinement of the midas, the emotions of the animal soul. So that's a general overview. Someone asked the question, is the purpose of counting sefira that even though we were freed from slavery, since we were slaves for 210 years, there's a lot of trauma we need to address and repair before we can be ready to accept the Torah 49 days later on Shavuos? Yes, that's a more, modern way of putting it. More contemporary way is the word I should use, not modern, but contemporary way of putting it. And essentially, yes, that all of us have our Mitzrayim, our limitations and constraints, our inhibitions, our fears, our insecurities, all the things that limit us, Mitzrayim, Meitzer v'Gvul, the straits, the dire straits that limit us. And Yetzias Mitzrayim is freeing ourselves. But then we want to maintain that freedom and integrate it into our lives, not just a one-time thing. So comes the counting over, literally on the second day of Pesach, Memochres HaShabbos, that, which means Memochres HaPesach, that is that process freeing ourselves from any forms of slavery, addictions, trappings, fears, and all the other things you can fill in the blanks, traumas, and we're repairing and we're healing. And how do you do it? By looking inside, introspection, soul-searching, looking inside your own self and seeing, where's my chesed stand? Is it healthy? Is it balanced? Does it have a healthy measure of chesed, sheba chesed, gvura sheba chesed, tefera sheba chesed, netzach sheba chesed, hayit sheba chesed, yahrzeit sheba chesed, malchus sheba chesed? And then comes week 2 and the same questions around gvura. So it's a detail, like the Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe says that his bonus has to be detailed. To just say, I want to be a better person, it's too general, too much of a platitude. You want to break it down and say, you know what, I think I need work on my gvura sheba chesed. I love well, but I don't know when to stop. Or the opposite, I have too much gvura and not enough chesed sheba gvura, as an example. Or too much netzach, drive, but not enough yielding and flexibility of hayit. So each day provides us with an introspection of our own psyche and our entire emotional spectrum. So when you finish 49 days, you come away with a true soul search that helps you enter into the 50th day of Matan Torah. So then, continuing with that theme, what different meanings are there in the word sefira? So v'sfartem lachem, yeah, means to count, but now based on what we just said, we also understand it has 2 other meanings. It has also the meaning from sipur, l'saper, like a sipur yetzias mitzrayim, to tell the story. And finally, the third meaning from the word even sapir. This is the pardes of Ramak. From the Ramak, he explains it that way. Even sapir, a sapphire stone, illuminated stone, an ayin beis. He discusses at length these 3 meanings as 3 stages that the spheres, elyenis, the spiritual spheres, the spiritual dimensions, which are called spheres, have all those 3. The number indicates the actual level, the outer dimension. The narrative, it's revealing a deeper narrative, a divine narrative. And ultimately, it illuminating, it's transparent. So the same thing when we refine ourselves, there's each day has its particular focus. Then you start reading the deeper narrative, the sipur, until the point that it shines and illuminates, becomes bright, transparent. A transparency between the Iyar and the Keli, between the light and the container. Later in Ayin Beis, he brings a 4th meaning from the word sefer. Like the sefer itself, the book itself, the letters on the page of a book, which is the source. The first 3 are all expression, but the book is where all the letters are on the page, they're an actual page, as he explains in Ayin Beis. So it all fits into this deeper story of Sfiras Emer. So why do we refine our emotions during these days? As I said, because we came out of Yetzias Mitzrayim, slavery, and all the tumah, the mem tashari tumah, interesting, 49 gates of impurity, also 49. And we want to cleanse ourselves from that, as we say in the Hirotz. So that's the best way to do is by refining our emotions, because our emotions need the most refinement. So then the question is, why not focus on cognitive emotions? To read it more specifically, why during sefira do we only refine the emotional midas and not the intellectual midas, especially since the intellectual midas are the source of the emotional midas? Perhaps sharpening and refining them can have a trickle-down effect and be another tool to help elevate the emotional midas as well. It's a good question. So firstly, we don't even talk about Chabad, Chachma Bina Das. We only talk about the 7 times 7, 49. But as you point out, there's mourning, there's also midas sheba mourning. Chassidus explains that the midas sheba mourning become the mourning sheba midas. That's first there's emotional excitement, intellectual excitement about an idea. And that in turn transfers over to become a personal emotional excitement. So the answer is because the focus in Sfiras Emer is the actual chefza, the actual experience of a person's life. Our subjective experiences are our 7 emotions. Intellect is critical in the process, because if you're going to contemplate what chesed sheba chesed, you're using your mind. And in general, when you contemplate these bonus and contemplation on godliness. You're using your mind. And indeed, the mind does have a stimulation of the emotions. But the birur of Nefesh Habamis, the primary Nefesh Habamis is Midas, like he says in Tanya Perek Tes. Because the Nefesh Habamis is driven by its subjective impulses. So Chassidus does indeed explain the Maimer HaMagbil L'Sheves. Some Tzedek and Yaler elaborates a bit on this, that the midas of the birur HaMeichen is easier than birur HaMidas. That's why it's easier to begin with a cognitive approach. But the actual Aveda is ultimately transformation. The actual effect on the animal soul is affecting its midas. And that's the focus in Sfiras Eimer. So it's not negating the fact that we use our minds and we use whatever tools we need to refine ourselves. Awareness is half the cure. Yediyah samach l'chesed refuah. And Yediyah, that's part of the Seichel Shabazah. But the work is on the midas themselves, on the Meichel Behim of Se'irim of Eimer. And that indeed is the actual effort that we put in that refines us. So, in that spirit, let's talk a few more questions that came in around all of this. Just trying to go in an orderly, organized fashion here. After counting the Omer, why do we recite Psalm 67 about the conductor of songs? Yes. So, the technical reasons, there are several reasons given for this. That first of all, Psalm 67, Samach Zayin, has 7 verses and 49 words. So every verse is like the 7 weeks, and every word corresponds to the 49 days. So it reflects the Omer count. That's on a very basic level. Its theme also is all about the spiritual theme of refining ourselves. What's the theme of the Lamatzech? Is Hashem's Rachamim, divine mercy, the revelation of God's ways, and the recognition of godliness. That's the whole Aveda. The Aveda of Birur HaMidas says Agdom et Matan Torah. Another additional point is that it also corresponds the 7 verses to the 7 branches of the Menera. And in Zoyar and other places, when we talk about Sfiras Eimer, as we discussed earlier, it's all about a journey of refinement. So therefore the Matzech reflects that. Okay. But on the deeper level, remember Lamatzech is B'mizmer, it talks about Nigunim, a Nigun. A Nigun, as we know, is Aveda Shabalev, Kulmus Halev, the quill of the heart. And the Birur HaMidas is about that. So this Kapitel Tilim talks about how to, you can call it part of the Sipur, or even Even Sapir, is to turn it into a Nigun that touches us, and touches our very neshama, and especially the Midas Adam. Okay. So the first verse of the psalm says is for the conductor of songs with musical instruments. What is the connection between sefira and singing songs with musical instruments? And it seems to be paradoxical because during sefira we don't use musical instruments. It's true we don't use musical instruments, but that doesn't mean we don't sing. On Shabbos we also don't use musical instruments, but we sing. So it's like the inner song, not through an external instrument because we honor the 24,000 students that passed away. But nigun, what better way of singing a song is by refining yourself, refining your midas. You sing a good Yiddish nigun. What it does is it helps soften, it helps refine, it helps purify the animal soul, because even the animal soul also appreciates his nigunim. Why do we not make a blessing after we missed one day of counting? Again, my focus here is not so much on the halachas of it, but on the premise, on Chassidus Applied. But since that question was asked, so let's spell this out. If someone forgot to put on tefillin one day, this person writes, he's not told to put on tefillin the rest of his life. He's not told to put tefillin on the rest of his life without a bracha. And what would happen if we forgot counting sefira one night and the next night we decided to say a bracha anyways? Would someone call the Omer police on us and get us in trouble? So first of all, the most important thing to remember is this. Sefira Seimer is about a numerical count. If you missed a day, it's not just you missed a day. When it comes to tefillin, every day is a separate mitzvah. The next day is not totally dependent on the previous day. Here, you can't have number 3 if you don't have number 2. So if you miss number 2, you can't continue counting with a bracha because you don't have the full picture. You need 49 in that order. You can't have... So it's like the refinement comes only when you do it completely. So you can continue to count, but without a bracha. So you count the numbers, and you still focus on the refinement part. But the full mitzvah is not possible because you simply need them all. The Rebbe has a whole sikha, the Minchas Chinuch, because on one hand, each day is a separate day, but on the other hand, every day is dependent on the previous day. So every day you make, so you could say only one bracha for all 49 days. No. It's every day has its own bracha and every day has its own number. But every number, in this case, is dependent on the previous number. So to make a bracha every day, you really need to continue making a bracha every day, you need to have a bracha that you made every day on that day. So that day is a complete day with the bracha of Hamshacha of that day. And then you can continue counting with a bracha. If not, you continue counting without a bracha. In Ruchnius, that means that, yes, you can refine 48 out of 49, or even 1 out of 49. But if you want to have the complete picture, you want to go through Chesed Shebechesed, then Gvura Shebechesed. If you skip Gvura Shebechesed, you can continue refinement, but you're not going to have the whole bracha of Hamshach in it. Which brings us back to the 3 meanings in sefira: to count. It also means to tell the story and to shine. The Chassidus say that the refining our character traits, we can clean off any klippa that tries to sully our souls, and we can make our souls shine. Absolutely, as we discussed before. And a bracha is also from the word to shine. Bracha of Hamshacha. It makes the mavrich, you're drawing down and you're illuminating and you're being mamshich oir. And that is necessary to have it in the complete, fullest sense of the word. But again, that doesn't mean you can't do refinement without a bracha. Does the Torah offer, do we get a special reward for counting all 49 days? Well, the greatest reward is that you then go to the number 50 and you get Matan Torah. That's the reward. Direct result. Not about a prize that you were able to count 49 days. It's schar mitzvah mitzvah. The very cause creates the effect. When you do what you have to do, then automatically, when a person is like saying, do I get a reward if I refine myself? If you refine yourself, yes, there'll be many rewards. Not as a prize, not as some type of a toy or candy, but the result of the very fact that you're more refined is going to affect everything in your life, your personal life, your life and your relationships with others and so on. So now, to go back to the theme of why we do not schedule weddings and listen to music during the days of the Omer. So we said it was due to the epidemic. So here's a question some people have asked. Why is Chabad and others extra strict by resuming the customs of mourning after Lag B'omer? Because we know by Lag B'omer the epidemic stopped. That's why on Lag B'omer we do simcha and there is music. So why some after Lag B'omer don't continue to do weddings and music, but Chabad and others don't? So that's based, of course, on the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe, who paskins that we don't, because the epidemic continued. Because it's not clear that it stopped. It may have stopped on the day of Lag B'omer. Did stop. But it doesn't say. It says, Bein Pesach l'Shvuos was the time when they passed away. So based on that, it could very well be that it continued. And according to the Alter Rebbe's Psak, that's what he paskins. Lag B'omer is stopped because of Rashbi. He was one of the Talmidim actually that survived because he was also a Talmid of Rabbi Akiva, but clearly he did pass away on Lag B'omer, but it wasn't necessarily that year, and not due to Lo Yinogu Kovid Zebazeh. Okay. So then to go a little more into this question, the big question that we've talked about many times, how could Rabbi Akiva not stop his students from disrespecting each other? Rabbi Akiva taught v'haftarecha kamecha zeh klal b'godel b'teira. Mamish, that's what Rabbi Akiva taught. It was like the essence. Klal godel b'teira, to love another. Definitely not to not show respect to one another. So how is it possible, first of all, his students b'chlal came to a point like that? And why did Rabbi Akiva not do anything to stop it? How is it possible that he was not able to realize and stop his students from not respecting each other? Also, was it not his responsibility? So there's a few questions that need to be answered. First of all, how is it possible? These were great students. So the Rebbe explains, and this is brought in Sfarim as well, it was due to their greatness. The Gemara says that in Gan Eden, you have the tzaddikim have a chuppah, each one have their own boundaries, their own section. So one shouldn't get burned being too close to his chaver. How could it get burned from a tzaddik to another tzaddik, Talmid Chacham and Talmid Chacham? Because when you are very passionate about your learning, you sometimes get so consumed with it, you don't realize that you don't have the proper gvura shebechesed, to put it in the words of Sfiras Eimer, and it could end up hurting another. Ein day saying Shabbos, people have different opinions. So if they're mediocre, it's one thing, but if they're very passionate, and these were Talmidei Rabbi Akiva, the Leinogu Kovet Zeh B'Zeh was not on petty matters. It was they ultimately were so committed and so consumed with their approach, like we'll talk about shortly, but like a rotze without a shuv. And that's indeed what happened. Their passion was so strong that they lacking that discipline. They learned the Ahavas Yisrael, but you know you can learn it. But then when you get passionate about your Seder Aveda, you can be in a way intolerant of someone else's Seder. Lack of full balance, the full Rotzev Yeshuv, the full balance that's necessary, Hiskalus. In the words of Chassidus and Kabbalah, the world of Toyu. The world of Toyu is a holy world. The sefiras are very intense there, however. The Eris Merubim, intense energies, and small containers. And what happens? It shatters. And then you need Elam Atikun, Atzilus, to come and repair it. What does it do? The Eris have to be somewhat subdued. It's like teaching. A person gets so passionate in teaching, they don't realize that they're overwhelming your students, and you can literally hurt them. Not physically, but the idea is you overwhelm them. You need to have discipline. That's hiskalulus, the interconnectivity of tikkun, which Toyu was lacking. So they were like Shviras the Toyu, and it created Shviras Sakelim. Why did Rabbi Akiva not intervene? They're Bali B'chira. I'm sure he intervened as much as he was able to. But when people are in the throes of such passion, Nodav and Avihu went into the Kedush Kedoshim. Why didn't anyone stop them? Because when you're in that passion, maybe you can't be stopped. You have to stop yourself. Rashbi and the other of the 5 Talmidim that survived had that balance. Similar to Rabbi Akiva himself, Nichnas b'shalom v'yotza b'shalom. He too had this moment when he was seen passionate, and his 3 chaverim, they got hurt. One died, one went mad, and one became an apostate. Nichnas b'shalom v'yotza b'shalom. It's a particular art. It's teferes. It's the balance. Is asking how is it possible that Rabbi Akiva students could not show respect for each other similar to asking how is it possible for fights to occur in Jewish communities today? Well, I will not be melamed schus that they're like the students of Rabbi Akiva, because it's not all coming l'shem shamayim. It's not all coming from their passion around Avodas Hashem. Sometimes it's pettiness and divisiveness and egos. But could it be? Yes, it's possible that sometimes a person is commitment and the good intentions, but the good intentions can disturb, and that's why we need to be very careful. Is it possible the students of Rabbi Akiva made the mistake of not respecting each other because they got mixed messages from Rabbi Akiva? On one hand, he went into the Pardes and came out unscathed, which showed us he had the proper balance of Rotze and Shuv. But on the other hand, he always said he wanted to give up his life in Kiddush Hashem, which perhaps implies too much Rotze and not enough Shuv. Because as we learned from Aaron's sons, the purpose is not to soar too high into the spiritual world and not to be able to come back, but to exist here in the physical world to do mitzvahs here. So I don't want to use the word mixed messages. Rabbi Akiva did not give mixed messages. Did they misunderstand? It's possible that they saw these two aspects. That's part of the Ratzei V'Shuv challenge. Because on one hand, you need the deep Ratzei, but you need the Shuv, the Nichnas B'Shalom V'Yotze B'Shalom. Here, the Loi Nogu Koved Zeh B'Zeh does seem to have an element of Ratzei in Kedusha, Ratzei of Kedusha, that did not have that balance. So definitely connected to all this. But I don't think you could say Rabbi Akiva except in the mixed messages. Maybe they didn't understand fully the picture. Rashbi, of course, did. And finally, what lessons can we learn from this today? I think it's very clear. As soon as you see machlekes, God forbid, as soon as you see someone not showing respect to one another, it's not about necessarily even understanding the reason behind it. That's something that we must stay away from by all means. And especially if it's justified, somebody's trying to justify it because this person is very passionate about their approach. No, it doesn't work that way. Rabbi Akiva's students were passionate and they meant well, but look what it created. So it's teaching us really not about how they sinned, so to speak, or how they were hurt and there was an epidemic. It's to warn us and to make us aware of the pitfalls when people are passionate. Passion needs humility. You must have that in order to keep the balance. That's the lessons of Sefira Seimer. It's not just mourning and grieving what had happened to them. It's making sure it doesn't happen now. Like it says, every generation that doesn't rebuild the Beis HaMikdash is as if it destroyed it. Beis HaMikdash was destroyed by sinas chinam. So we have to. So it's a lesson. Yes, we can point fingers and say, look at how bad they were, baseless hatred. The key is, how are you today? Are we learning the lessons that need to be learned? And then the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt. So it's a tikkun also for the Talmidei Rebbe Akiva. We learned, they like trailblazers, and they taught us a lesson that we learn from, not to know the pitfalls, to know the concerns that can happen. And finally, one final thing about Omer we'll address, which is, why is it customary to learn Masechta Sotah during the tractate of Sotah during these days? So it does have 49 pages. It corresponds to the 49. As, by the way, Masechta Shavuos, it talks about oath, but Shavuos is also the name of Shavuos of the holiday, also has 49, and some have that custom. But there's another thing. Sotah is, of course, all about a woman that's accused of infidelity. And Sotah is the ways that you make sure that Shalom Bayis, like the Eibishter says, erase my name to maintain Shalom Bayis. What was Matan Torah? Yem Chasanos is Matan Torah. Yitzias Mitzrayim was the beginning. The Eibishter took the Yidden out of Mitzrayim, but then 49 days to prepare. So some people say, Zohar it says, and others, some sages, authorities say, that after the 49 days, that the 7 weeks is like a form of tahara, purification, preparing the chosin and kala, like the 7 days of tahara that a woman does before she goes to the mikveh. So 7 weeks. And that's the purification of Sefira Seimer, to prepare that it should not be like a Sotah. So Masechta Sotah is talking about all the things we do to purify and make sure that the chasana, Yem Chasanas Zamat Torah, will be the best possible way. Okay. Now, we covered Omer. I want to just talk about a little follow-up. I know it's like really a change of, a little radical change, I would even say, like a little jolting. But I want to talk about a bunch of questions and follow-up that came in. Is owning a dog appropriate? I know I was looking for a way to make a hefsek between Parsha la Parsha, between this discussion of Omer, but so be it. So we talked about that last week, and there were a few comments. I'll just choose a few among many. So there's the halachas around it, and there's the spirit of it we talked about. So halachically, are you allowed to own a dog? As I said, ask a Rav. The spiritual part, ask your mashpia. I don't want to make a psak here. Is it the spirit? generally speaking, it's not necessarily the spirit. But I can see why some people may be drawn to it. But instead of making this a public forum, because it's case by case, I would again recommend a Rov and a Mashpia. What people wrote here was, a person wrote, right, first of all, to look in Likutei Sichos Chelek Tazayin. That Likutei Sichos volume 16, page 616. So there's a letter from the Rebbe from Tafshin Yutes, where there he talks about can a person bring a dog with him into a shul? It appears it was talking about someone that needed a dog for support. It could be maybe a blind person. So the Rebbe says clearly that there's no halachic isur necessarily, and even though there are different sources brought, but you don't just bring a medrash to bring proof. So this again, it comes down to a question you should ask it of, because there may be situations where a person may need it. Like he brings that in the Beis Hamikdash, there was actually, when the fire of the Beis Hamikdash came, it says in the Medrash and Gemara that it was the tzura of a lion and of a dog. And the Rebbe explains it's not just the behavior, but actually the tzura, the shape of that. So you see, these are creatures of Hashem. So there's a concept of having that idea. That doesn't mean that you have to do it, but means that it's not necessarily something completely off limits. That's basically what the Rebbe talks about. And then he talks about going into a shul to tell someone who needs a dog to go into the shul, let's say a blind person who needs a seeing eye dog, to say stand outside, that's a problem. Because people are all going in and he's standing outside. It's true you could have someone else walk him in without the dog, but there are situations where you may not be able to do that or cause him pain. So bottom line is, it's not so mufrach, but this does not necessarily address whether l'chatchila someone should have a dog, stamazeh. We're not talking about a person who needs it, let's say a seeing eye dog for a blind person. And regarding emotional support dog, that I would again defer to professionals to see if it's necessary or not. That itself can be a discussion. So I understand why you've shown me the letter. You want to point out that there is that concept. I understand, but it's also with certain circumstances. Another person referred to the Gemara in Shabbos Lamed Amid Beis that when David HaMelech passed away, so Shlomo went to ask what to do because there were dogs. It was hot sun. He was afraid that the dogs would attack the body, David HaMelech's body. So they told him to put meat there, and if there's meat, the hungry dogs will eat the meat. So you see from that dogs are allowed. But again, this is all after the fact. And no one's saying to go kill dogs. That's not the point. The question is whether you should own one dog and is the right spirit for children and so on. Like someone wrote to me, why would you need to have dogs if you have children? Even if you felt you need emotional support, that's what children are there for. But again, this needs to be addressed case by case. And finally, another person who was an advocate, obviously, right? Dear Rabbi Jacobson, on your Sunday podcast, you read a letter from a viewer that was very critical and made fun of people in the community that have dogs. I would like to reply to that viewer and say, if you don't like people who have dogs, then you probably don't like the Rebbe and Rebbetzin because they had a dog at their home. Granted, the reason they got a dog was for necessity. Someone made threats against the Rebbe's house, so to protect the house, a person in the community bought a trained guard dog for the Rebbe's house. And the Rebbetzin used to go out in the backyard every day to feed the dog. So please think twice before you write blanket criticism. I wouldn't exactly bring that as an example, frankly, because like you said, it was for a particular purpose. That's not they had a dog. The dog was there for Shmira purposes. The Rebbetzin, compassionate, yes, maybe gave some food. It's not like they had a dog and they walked the dog and the dog became part of their family, Chaz v'Shalom. So I would be very careful throwing the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin into this. So that I protest against that. But you have to remember, I read also letters from people who support it. So obviously everybody's subjective here. If someone has a dog, wants to justify it. I'm not trying to come here from a point of critique or a point of support. Talk from Torah point of view. What does the Torah say? What does Chassidus say? So that's why I'm saying, talk to Rav, talk to Mashpia. We have to do things not just purely whether you're allowed to do it, but whether it's appropriate to do. Is it in the right spirit? And you can understand why I'm saying it that way. But let's get ourselves out of the picture. It's not about defending a position. I understand people are attached to their animals and they're attached to their dogs. I personally don't have a dog. And I know many people don't. I don't feel a need for it. Are dogs bad things? No, but everything in its time and place. There are a lot of things in this world that you don't necessarily bring into your home. So that's why this is something that should be addressed case by case by case. I want to conclude with an interesting question about a man who passed away this past week that people call Charlie Buttons. Sad news that is there a history? Is there a history of Charlie Buttons' special relationship with the Rebbe? Sad news that a beautiful community fixture, Charlie Buttons, passed away. He used to visit every simcha and give out balloons to bring joy to the children. I remember that during davening in 770, he would always answer Amen the loudest and do it with such a purity. He exemplified what the Rebbe Rashab writes in Ayin Beis, that it's beneficial to answer Amen Yehi Shmei Rabbe with all our strength. Not sure what the connection is, but okay. I remember the Rebbe always greeting Charlie with a big smile when walking past him in 770. As kids, we all heard rumors that Charlie was one of the 36 hidden tzaddikim. Now that sadly Charlie has passed away, can the cat be left out of the bag? Interesting expression in the context of our conversation about dogs. And can it be revealed that he was one of the hidden tzaddikim? Does Rabbi Jacobson have any inside information about the relationship between the Rebbe and Charlie that can shed light on these rumors? So I saw this fixture as well in my life, and I heard that he had worked for the Postal Service many years, and then something happened to him, I think mentally or emotionally, and he became one of the neshamas that we saw around here. I can't say firsthand that I know the history. I'm sure some people may know more than I do. I'll just say, yes, the fact that the Rebbe looked at every Jew and looked at every person with a kind eye and with a heart, and maybe saw in him a deeper neshama. I remember when I was a kid, there was another man that I grew up with. I forgot what his name was. But I remember every Shabbos, he would stand all the way to the right of 770. Well, to the left of the Rebbe, to be like the other side, the Maidiv side, at the end of the Fabrengen, and he would put up a cup and say L'chaim. Just came to say L'chaim. The Rebbe gave him always a special L'chaim. Later I heard that he was one of the barley that the Rebbe made years in the 40s. He would come. I used to see him always in 770. He's an interesting character. So there's no question there were these neshamas. Whether the Lamed Vovniks or not, I don't know who's an expert on that and who can determine that. But definitely neshamas that the Rebbe was Makarev, was connected with. You probably remember the basketball coach, how the Rebbe would make to him when he would patch, by Fabrengens, we see him videos. Neshamas, I never really explored because, listen, everyone has their journey. Who knows their connection? It's my business. We don't always have to pry. But it's a beautiful thing to see because he did have this strange look. It was definitely different. But a neshama. I do know some people actually who knew him better. I'll probably ask around. If I find more information, I'll be happy to share. But the main thing, we have to always look at it, not so much a curiosity or sensationalism, but rather lesson to us. Al tabet al mareu, a neshama is a neshama. No one knows the depth, the tifkeit, the beauty. Like the Baal Shem Tov says, Eretz Chayfetz. It's like a land, a earth that is filled with precious jewels and treasures. So on the surface we may not see things, but when we look into the premise, which has been a central theme throughout this discussion, today's program, is they look in the premise with the eyes of the Rashbi, you see treasures, you see unbelievable beauty, where others may not see it immediately. And that's what Chassidus teaches us, to look in the premise, inside ourselves as well. Just as a person has to know their own chesronos, says the Frierdiker Rebbe, we also have to know our own milas. That's a big central theme of this parsha as well. And I'll say something on the end of the parsha, lahazir agdelim alaktanim. Emer v'amarta, you should tell the kohanim, lahazir agdelim alaktanim. So it's a lesson to all of us. Lahazir literally means to warn, to protect, to discipline, to make sure that the older ones are training the younger ones that they should be careful. But lahazir also comes, as the Rebbe says, from the word zohar. Maskilim yazhiru kezohar harakia. Like the zohar, illuminating, splendor, light. Sapir, not just sefira, but it illuminates. So you're illuminating, the Gedalim have to illuminate the young. And that too is the element of revealing the previous revealing. And each of us is a Kohen, Mamleches Kohen V'Gei Kodesh. So that's the relevance that each of us has in our this parsha, even though it's all talked about kohanim, because we all are Kohen Beruchnius in a certain way. And finally, the question was asked about the physical deformities of a Kohen, why it doesn't allow him to serve in the Beis Hamikdash. So now is not the place to go into it, but there too, you have to remember there's the chitzenius and there's the premius. So there's a mimer of the Alter Rebbe about this. And he actually says, but Truma, they're allowed to eat. So clearly it's not some discrimination against the deformities or their handicaps. So I spoke about this in episodes 117, 118, 353, 40, and 401. You can look it up on ChassidusApplied.com or use simonjacobson.ai where you can find things through AI. And there it talks about it, and that's where the Rebbe actually mentions it in one of the notes on his Shema connected to Yud Gimel Iyar, about that the Eibishter sometimes makes the deformity because they are in a sense mechaper, and they through that they end up helping us win the battles. But you have to look into the sources to see more details on that. But it's also recognizing that the deformities are only on the outside, not on the inside. The Beis Hamikdash was important to have a certain outer and inner dimensions, as the Maimer explains, and Derech Mitzvah Sechel, the Tzemach Tzedek elaborates on it with this very powerful moshel that the Rebbe uses as an example for his own brother, where you could see something on the outside may seem negative, but it's really ultimately leads to a deeper connection. So the bottom line is that we are at the verge, at the threshold, as the Rebbe told us, of seeing the previous in everything. Eitcha Hashem canafta be, even in the things that were painful and afflicting, to see the previous, even in the things that seem negative. And there should be that Kod of Mamish, Schus of Lag B'omer, before that Pesach Sheni, and Yud Gimel Iyar, and all the other powerful elements of this period in time, sefira Se'emer, Parshas Emer, and so on, that we should actually see the Geula Amitis V'Ashlema, as the Tzemach Tzedek brings in Birei Azer, Chelik Beis, that sefira Se'emer is connected to Mashiach, the Geula Amitis V'Ashlema through Yefutza Ma'nesecha Chutza. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Everyone be well, and Afreilach and Lag B'omer.
This program is brought to you by MyLife Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.